The Chasm and the Collision by Robert Alessar. Copyright 2017 by Robert Alessar. All rights reserved. Any reproduction of this copyrighted material by any means without the express written consent of the author is strictly prohibited. For Jacob and Kira, all the way. Chapter 4. Dinosaur Dogs and the Dining Room. Between homeroom and algebra class, Alex intended to tell Simon at least a little bit about what had happened after he had awakened from his dream. He figured the general cacophony of between classes traffic would keep them from being overheard. However, before he could even raise the subject, he and Simon were accosted by Josh Green, an algebra classmate, whose homeroom was near theirs. Josh had found the previous night's assignment difficult and wanted to go over some of the problems with Simon. It was painfully obvious to Alex that Simon wanted to tell Josh to leave them alone and figure things out for himself, but Simon controlled his tongue and discussed the subject as best he could. Once they got to class, he even sat down with Josh to go over some of the problems that had confused him. Alex was mildly exasperated, but also amused. Everyone knew how smart Simon was, and that he wouldn't turn someone away if they needed help. That was the curse of being both smart and nice, Alex supposed. Soon Mr. Grant, the algebra teacher, called the class to order, precluding any further possible conversation. Alex imagined that he could almost see steam coming from his friend's ears throughout the entire class period. He knew Simon was intensely frustrated, but dutifully followed along in class nonetheless. He even volunteered to answer questions, though Mr. Grant usually preferred to call on other students, since he knew that Simon would have the answers. When first period ended, Alex asked Simon if he wanted to come along to English class with him quickly so they could both talk to Megan about the dream. Unfortunately, Simon's second period class was on the other side of the school, and he had to go to his locker before it started. The two reluctantly went their separate ways, and Alex raced to second period, hoping to seize as much time as possible to talk to Megan before the other members of the discussion group arrived. As she had been the day before, Megan was in her seat already when Alex entered the room. This time she wasn't drawing, but was leaning back in her chair, tapping a pencil against the desk. When Alex walked in, she looked directly at him, her eyes following his progress as he approached. He thought she seemed tense, but her demeanor didn't convey quite its usual hesitancy. "Hey, Alex," she greeted as he sat down next to her, and Alex could not help but feel a soaring sensation about the fact that she knew his name now. "Hey, Megan," he replied, trying not to grin. Reminding himself that he wanted to talk to her about a serious matter, and that he had limited time in which to do so, he said, "So—" Megan cut him off abruptly, saying, "You and Simon both had the same dream, didn't you? The one in the garden." Alex was rather stunned by Megan's directness, but he nodded and said, "Yep, sure did." Megan shook her head. "I thought so," she said. I saw both of you there." Then she looked briefly at Alex as if she were waiting for him to express surprise. When he did not, she went on, what does Simon think's going on?" Alex was disappointed that Megan didn't ask what he thought was going on, but he had to admit that Simon was the much more likely source for potential answers. Still, he wanted to check with Megan about another matter before getting into Simon's mutant fruit hypothesis, so he said, "He's got some ideas, but first let me ask you something. After you woke up from the dream, did you see or hear anything weird?" "Well," she responded, "no, at least not right after." "What do you mean?" Alex asked. "Well," she said again, "I mean, nothing happened at night. Nothing like what you heard and saw last night, but—" Now she hesitated and looked shy again, glancing around the room as if to ensure that no one but Alex could hear her. When she seemed convinced, she leaned a bit closer and quietly said, "When I was on my way to school this morning, I saw... well, a ways up ahead from me, I thought I saw—" Megan's voice tapered off, her brow furrowed and her eyes downcast. Alex tried to be patient while she worked up her nerve, but he couldn't help applying at least a little pressure since they didn't have much time before class started. "What did you see?" he asked gently. Now Megan looked directly at him and replied, "Well, at first I thought it was a dog up ahead of me in one of the yards down the block, but when I got closer I saw that it didn't have any fur. It was sniffing around in the yard almost like a dog, but it was Well, it was shaped wrong. It had like a rounded back, it was bigger than a dog, and it had a long tail. Alex felt a chill run through him as he recognized an unexpected possible connection with what Megan was telling him. Her description was sketchy, at least it was so far, but for some reason Alex felt she had seen something, a part of which at least he had seen the previous morning. Did it look like a dinosaur tail? He asked. Megan's eyes widened, but she looked relieved as she asked him, "Did you see it too?" "Well, I think so," Alex replied, "or at least part of it. I only saw the tail, and I didn't see it today. I saw it yesterday." Megan looked surprised. "You did? You mean last night?" "No," Alex said, "yesterday morning. I was sitting in homeroom talking to Simon and looking out the window, and I saw this, like, dinosaur tail behind that wall near the tennis court. You know the one I mean?" Megan nodded. "Well, it looked like it was in the yard of that house that's right up near the wall. But then it moved all the way behind the wall, and I didn't see it anymore after that. I didn't want to say anything because I was already seeing stuff that neither of you guys were seeing, and this was during the daytime. I thought I really might be crazy, you know? But now..." He trailed off, amazed and more than a little relieved. Megan's expression also seemed almost happy as she said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I thought I was, well, like you said, crazy or something when I saw it." Eager and excited in his relief, Alex asked, "Did you get any closer? What else did it look like?" Megan shook her head. "I don't know," she told him. "It went around the house and into the yard before I got there, and, well, to be honest, I didn't really want to get too close." "I don't blame you," Alex said, and he was by no means just trying to assuage her embarrassment. He thought back to the flying manta-like creature he had seen the night before. He had barely wanted to be as close to it as he had been, and he had been inside his house. If he had seen that thing while he was outside... "Did you see it again today?" Megan asked. Alex shook his head and said, "No." "Did Simon see it?" "Not as far as I know," Alex replied, "and he probably would have said something if he had, though I didn't say anything yesterday." Now Megan looked puzzled. "But wait," she said, "if you didn't see it and Simon didn't see it, why did you ask me if I saw or heard anything weird after I woke up from my dream?" In his moment of relief and enthusiasm, Alex had completely forgotten his earlier question, and it took him a moment to realize what she meant. "Oh, right," he said once he had backtracked in his head. "Well, after I had my dream last night, I found something really, really strange." Megan looked lost, and Alex could hardly blame her. However, he didn't have time to go into a good description of what he had seen behind his dining room curtain. The time between classes was only 5 minutes, and the classroom was rapidly filling up with students. At any moment, the other two members of their Crucible reading group would show up. "Listen," he said, "we can't really talk about it here, but can you meet me and Simon after school again and walk home with us so we can talk about it?" "Heck yeah," Megan answered, surprising Alex with her utter lack of hesitation. In fact, he thought she almost looked excited as she continued, "I want to hear about what you saw and what Simon thinks about all of this." As before, Alex felt a little pang that Megan wasn't curious about his own thoughts. Still, he had to admit that he too wanted to know more of Simon's ideas. In light of Megan's new revelation, Alex wasn't sure that the shared hallucination idea held up. Maybe it did, but, well, Megan had experienced her encounter at a different time than his sighting of the dinosaur tail on a different day, though the tail, at least, did seem to be the same or similar. A shared illusion, if it were like the truly shared dream, should, as Simon noted, have been the same for all of them and happened simultaneously. It seemed that more than one bizarre phenomenon was taking place, and though he was sure they must be connected, Alex had no idea what the connection might be. How could dreams about impossible stone constructs hanging over monstrous cliffs and beautiful garden parks, all under sunset-colored skies, be linked to visions of flying manta rays and animals with dinosaur tails that sniffed in front yards like dogs? Also, how could any of that be connected to what he had seen in his dining room last night? And did the berries they had eaten, genetically engineered or not, really have anything to do with it all? Or was Simon completely mistaken about them? From the look on her face, Alex guessed that Megan's thoughts paralleled his own. However, she couldn't give further voice to them because the third member of their group entered the room just then and walked cheerily over to join them. Alex and Megan exchanged pensive glances before greeting their partner and forcefully dragging their thoughts around to the subject of American literature. The remainder of the school day seemed to drag interminably. Second and third period were minor torture to Alex, Megan's presence in the former notwithstanding. He had a terrible time concentrating, and though he didn't feel sleepy, a surprising fact given 2 nights in a row of disturbed rest, he found it difficult to follow what was being taught and discussed. Lunch came after third period, but it was split into 3 shifts, as was the break time before and after, so Alex didn't get to talk with either Simon or Megan. Even if they had eaten together, they would have been surrounded by other students and probably wouldn't have gotten much talking done. When lunchtime ended, Alex rushed to his 4th period and got there early enough to tell Simon that Megan had indeed dreamed the same dream they had. He also gave Simon a brief sketch of what Megan had seen that morning, and what he himself had seen the day before when he had told Simon that he had been dizzy. Simon seemed troubled indeed by the new revelations, and Alex thought that he was probably trying to figure out if the information supported or detracted from his idea that the strange goings-on were triggered by genetically modified fruit. That the dreams and the things that he, Simon, and Megan had seen or heard were connected, Alex had no doubt. When it came to the berries, though, he just wasn't as certain. He didn't see how genetically engineered, or even radioactive, fruit could trigger things like what they had experienced. It would take some sort of magic berries, close relatives of the beans that grew Jack's beanstalks, to be able to do what Simon seemed to think they had done. Alex was old enough that he didn't believe in magic. Not really, anyway. 5th period, in which Alex was again separated from both Simon and Megan, seemed to go a bit more quickly than his other classes had, but that was probably because Alex was so distracted by his speculations. He didn't follow much of what the teacher said, and he knew that he was lucky not to be called on. Finally, the school day ended, and Alex rushed to his locker. He had to remind himself to put the books he needed for homework into his backpack, which he did both quickly and haphazardly. He didn't bother stuffing his jacket into the bag, but instead simply shoved his arms into the sleeves and wore it, since that was faster. Then, slinging the bag over his shoulder, he shut his locker, spun the dial of the lock, and walked quickly to the front exit of the school. As on the previous afternoon, Simon was already waiting near the flagpoles, his own backpack resting on a bench. Alex scanned the area for anything out of the ordinary, but saw only the many students, all making their various ways home for the day. A line of yellow buses was in its usual place along the road in front of the school, steadily collecting those who lived too far away to walk home. Simon waved and Alex greeted him, then placed his own bag on the bench. The 2 boys didn't say anything else as they waited for Megan. Alex knew that, if a conversation started, it would inevitably be about dreams and other visions, and he didn't want to discuss those things until Megan was present. They didn't have to wait long. Mere seconds after Alex unslung his backpack, Megan walked out the front door and headed toward the 2 boys. She didn't look at all hesitant this time, and she walked at a pace that Alex would have struggled to match. Her face was focused and serious, and Alex found himself slightly distracted by how cute she looked. "Hi, guys," she said as she approached them. "Hey, Megan," Simon greeted. "Hi, Megan," Alex said in turn, then picked up his backpack. "You guys want to walk and talk?" "Yeah," Megan agreed. "That way I don't have to worry about being late." As Simon picked up his own backpack and the 3 headed off, Alex asked, "Were you late yesterday?" "No," she replied, "but when I do get home late, my mom really kind of freaks out. She always assumes I've been kidnapped or killed or something." "Huh," Alex breathed, surprised by this new insight into the working of Mrs. Tavis's mind. His own mother, of course, didn't get home until well after he did, so if he were late, she wouldn't know. But he guessed that a girl's mother would tend to be more nervous about such things than a boy's would be. They walked at a much slower pace than either Alex or Megan had used when approaching the meeting spot. Simon asked Megan, "So did Alex tell you anything about what I said about the fruit?" Megan's brow furrowed, and she answered, "No." "Yeah," Alex chimed in, "I didn't really get a chance. We only had the 5-minute class break, and we were talking about the thing we saw with the dinosaur tail." Simon nodded, then Megan said to him, "What do you think about everything?" "Well," Simon answered slowly, looking troubled, "I sort of had this idea that maybe the fruit we all ate the day before yesterday, the berries, Megan nodded. Yeah, well, I thought maybe it was like some sort of genetically modified stuff you hear about, and maybe it had some weird effect on us, and that's why we're all having the same dreams, like some kind of telepathy. I mean, eating some foods before you go to bed is supposed to give you nightmares and stuff, right? Megan nodded again, quite soberly. Alex thought she was having a hard time really accepting the proposed notion, but perhaps he was just projecting his own feelings onto her. Simon, apparently having his own doubts as well, went on, Yeah, but now I'm kind of thinking that can't be it. I mean, dreams are one thing. No one really knows why people dream, or if they know they haven't told me. So if it was just the dreams, then maybe the fruit idea might have made sense. But it's not just the dreams, Megan said, in a tone not of interruption, but of simply carrying on Simon's thoughts. It's the thing you heard and Alex saw yesterday night, and the thing I saw this morning and Alex saw yesterday. Simon nodded. Right, he said. And I don't see how genetically modified fruit could be doing stuff like that. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Alex said, But you do think they're all, related or connected or whatever, right? After a longish pause, Simon replied, Well, I don't understand how they're all connected, but it seems like they've got to be. It's like I said yesterday, it's hard to think that two totally different, very weird things are both happening at the same time but don't have anything to do with one another. Megan nodded again. It makes sense, she agreed. Plus, I just kind of feel like it's all part of the same thing. The dreams, the flying thing, the dinosaur dog, and... She had been looking at the sidewalk in front of her as they walked, but now she lifted her head and looked at Alex. Hey, she said suddenly. You said you'd seen something really weird last night after your dream, but you didn't get a chance to tell me anything about it. Oh, yeah, that's right, Simon said. I completely forgot about that. You even said you might be able to show me this afternoon. Really? Megan asked, looking at Alex so directly and intently that he was worried that she would trip if she kept walking while doing so. Well, yeah, maybe, Alex admitted, hoping he hadn't built their expectations up too much. He would hate to tell them what he had found in the dining room and then discover that it wasn't really there. Or worse, to tell them about it and find out that they were unimpressed as well as upset with him for the disappointment. So what did you see? Megan asked, her eyes bright. Alex felt a little swoop in his stomach in response to her close attention. Alex didn't get any farther than that because he was interrupted by Simon abruptly saying, What the frack? In a stunned and distracted voice. The three had just crossed the last side street along the short route to Alex's house. Simon, who was opposite Alex from Megan, had automatically been looking to the left, his gaze incidentally directed along the side street. Now he came to a complete stop and stared down the road, his eyes wide and his mouth hanging open. Alex and Megan both stopped as well and followed Simon's gaze. They immediately saw the cause of his distraction, and Alex found himself gaping as much as Simon. Moving along the sidewalk toward them was a truly bizarre group. It included two strangely dressed men, one significantly taller than the other. They each wore a kind of tunic that looked to have been made by simply cutting a head hole in a long rectangle of cloth, draping over themselves and then belting it at the waist with a gold-colored rope. Beneath this, they wore simple black pants tucked into black boots. The taller man, who was pale and had red hair, wore a bright blue tunic, while the shorter man, who was powerfully built, wore one of deep red. He seemed to be in charge of his companions, based on the way they followed behind him, and kept glancing attentively at him as he spoke. He had dark skin and close-cropped, curly black hair, and his carriage conveyed purpose and confidence. But it was not the presence of the two men that had drawn Simon's attention and his stunned exclamation. Walking with the two men were three other creatures. They went on all fours and had arched backs, their rear legs somewhat longer than the front. Their heads were flattish and broad, reminding Alex of salamanders, and bore two nostrils set far forward and low on their snouts, and small, widely spaced but forward-looking eyes. They had no fur, only what might have been finely scaled, leathery skin. But at their short, thick necks, tufts of bright feathers stuck out on both sides. Their backs rose to about waist height on the shorter of the two men. Each of the creatures also had a long, tapering reptilian tail, just like the one Alex had seen behind the tennis court wall. Alex, Megan, and Simon stood and stared, struck dumb and motionless by the 5 figures before them. The bizarre quintet had just passed the middle of the short block when a woman pushing a stroller came out of a nearby driveway and turned directly toward them. The 2 men and the 3 reptilian beasts all immediately and nimbly ducked off the sidewalk and into the street, clearing the way for the woman and child. They didn't discuss it, and no one gave a command to the 3 lizard creatures, but they all moved simultaneously, as if this sort of thing happened all the time. To Alex's amazement, and he was sure to that of his friends, the woman with the stroller didn't react at all to the strange group. Neither, it seemed, did her very young child, whom Alex could hear babbling happily. As the woman and baby passed, one of the lizards stretched its head to the limited length of its neck and gave a sniff at the baby and stroller. There was nothing threatening in the gesture. It seemed merely an expression of curiosity, but Alex heard the powerfully built red-tunicked man clearly and firmly say, "Leave it alone." The sniffing creature jerked its head back and looked up at its apparent master with what Alex could have sworn was a sheepish expression. Then it did something that made him truly begin to doubt his sanity. It opened its wide, gaping mouth, revealing a broad array of short teeth, some very sharp and some flattened, and said, "Sorry, Freeman, babies always smell nice." Alex could not believe his ears. Had that lizard thing spoken? It must have, because the taller of the 2 men, in response to the creature's comment, gave a chuckle and said, "That's what you think. You've never had to change a messy baby." "Well, how could I?" the feathered reptile responded. "I've got these things." It held up its left front leg, which Alex saw ended in a wide, almost bird-like hand, with 4 clawed digits tightly packed together, facing front, and 1 shorter, spur-like projection in the rear. Alex noticed that the creature's legs were slung underneath it, not like a lizard's or an alligator's, but more like a dog's or a cat's, or a dinosaur's. Alex glanced to his left and right to see if Megan and Simon both really seemed to be seeing and hearing the same things he was seeing and hearing. From the almost comically astonished expressions on their faces, he guessed that they were. Megan looked blankly dumbfounded, and Simon appeared terrified. Then something happened that caused Alex to feel just like Simon looked. Another of the feathered reptiles looked directly at the 3 preteens. In a deeper voice than the first it said, "Hey, boss, look." The leader looked down at it and, in an annoyed tone, said, "I told you not to call me boss." "Sorry," it responded, "but look over there." It gestured with its front paw, claw, hand toward Alex, Simon, and Megan and said, "I think they can see us." The other lizards and the 2 men turned instantly to look at the 3 students, regarding them silently. Their attitude, even that of the reptiles, was one of blatant astonishment. "Oh, crap," Simon whispered. Then he looked at Alex and Megan and in a quickly rising voice shouted, "Simon says run!" and then followed his own command. After an endless moment's pause, during which both groups, except Simon, continued to regard each other with amazement, Alex and Megan, following their companion, took off down the block. Simon was firmly in the lead, his long legs and his obvious fright giving him greater speed, which added to his head start. Alex hung back with Megan, whose shoes were not as well suited to running as were those of the 2 boys. As he ran, Alex called ahead to Simon, "Go to my house, it's closer." Alex wasn't sure Simon heard him, but as they neared the end of the long block, Simon took the turn into Alex's front yard, almost tumbling to the ground as he changed directions, his feet skidding in the new layer of tree buds that had fallen in the last few days. Megan, just ahead of Alex, turned more carefully, and Alex brought up the rear. "Unlock the door, man!" Simon yelled, and Alex saw him looking back the way they had come, his eyes wide. Alex didn't look, not wanting to be distracted by what he was sure would be the sight of the 2 men and 3 loping reptiles coming down the length of the block. Instead, he focused with all his might on getting his house key out of his pocket. Then, trying to keep calm, he brought the key to the lock. At first, he tried to put it in upside down, but he quickly corrected himself and was able to unlock the door. Simon and Megan popped inside, then Alex followed, shutting and locking the door behind him. While he did, Simon went to the living room and began to close the curtains. Alex, deciding that wasn't a bad idea, first dropped his book bag on the front hall floor, then went into the family room and closed those curtains as well. He looked outside as the drapes drew together, but he could see no sign of pursuit. "Where are they?" he asked, his heart pounding with exertion and fright as he turned away from the window. Megan stood in the family room, close to Simon, who had come to join Alex after closing the living room drapes. "I don't know," Simon answered, his face stark and pale. With both sets of drapes drawn, the front of the house was quite dark, especially in comparison to the bright sunlight outside, so Alex moved to turn on a standing lamp near his father's easy chair. "Don't!" Simon yelled. "They might see the light!" Alex hesitated. Was that likely? It was broad daylight outside. Surely a chair-side lamp wouldn't be bright enough to be noticed through a set of curtains. Over Alex's indecision, Megan said, "I don't think they followed us." Simon looked at her, his eyes wide and his face almost completely devoid of thought. Alex, who had not once looked back as he had run for home, asked, "Really?" "Really," Megan replied with a nod. She was a bit out of breath, and she certainly seemed frightened, but she was much more self-possessed than Simon. "I didn't even see them come around the corner," she said. "Did you, Simon?" Simon just stared at her for a long time, his own breathing rapid but deep now. Alex was worried, as he had been the day before, that his friend was going to faint. But Simon steadily regained control of himself, and he finally admitted, "No, they didn't seem to be following us at all." "Oh," was all Alex could say. His own breath and heartbeat felt nearly back to normal now, and he asked, "Then why did you say to run?" Simon raised his eyebrows in astonishment. "Are you kidding me?" he demanded. "Did you see what I saw?" Megan looked thoughtful, and she asked, "Actually, did we all see the same thing? I mean, I saw 2 men and 3 of those dinosaur dog things like the one I saw this morning." Alex nodded. "Yep," he agreed, "that's what I saw." Simon reluctantly nodded, agreeing as well. "But they could talk," he burst out. "Those lizard things could talk." "Yeah," Alex affirmed with amazement. Megan nodded. "Yeah, I heard them too," she said. "Or at least I heard 2 of them." But, Simon sputtered, "how could lizards talk?" "I don't know," Alex replied, just as astonished as his friend. "How can those things even exist? I mean, it's like that manta ray thing. I'd never even heard of anything like them before. I don't know what they are." "And did you see," Megan asked, "that lady, the one with the baby? She acted like they weren't even there, like there was nothing weird going on at all." Simon looked at her directly, his eyes all but unblinking. As often happened, Alex imagined he could almost hear the sounds of gears turning in his friend's head. The process of thinking did at least seem to calm Simon down a bit, and when he next spoke, his voice had lost most of its near-hysterical edge. "You're right," he said. "She didn't see them, and they didn't expect her to be able to see them. I mean, they all got out of her way, but they didn't really try to hide or anything. And that one lizard thing, it even sniffed at the baby. If something like that came close to a stroller I was pushing, I'd freak for 2 weeks. But she didn't do anything." Alex and Megan looked at each other, nodding in agreement with Simon's assessment. Then they looked back at him as he continued speaking. "They didn't expect her to be able to see them, and they didn't expect us to be able to see them either," he said. "But how?" Alex wondered. "How could they not think we'd be able to see them, and how come that lady couldn't?" Megan shrugged, completely at a loss for an answer. Simon, however, bore a frown of concentration on his face, and Alex found it amazing how quickly his friend had switched from stark terror to deep thought. "It's like the other night," he said slowly, "when we heard that sound. No one else in our houses woke up, right? Even though it was loud." "Yeah," Alex agreed with a nod. "This is the same sort of thing. I mean, that noise should have woken up half the people on the block. And those lizard things? Not just that lady with the stroller, but everyone they must have passed should have been freaking out and screaming." Alex and Megan looked at each other again, then Megan said, "You're right. There should have been a lot of other kids coming up from school who would have seen them. There was no one even looking at them or anything." Simon nodded, and they all stood silent for a long time, the family room dim around them. Against the brighter light coming through the dining room window, Simon and Megan looked a bit like shadows to Alex, though he could make out their expressions by the shapes of their eyes and mouths against the relative pallor of their faces. "What the heck is going on?" he asked them. Simon shrugged, his face still deeply thoughtful. Megan looked at Simon and asked, "Do you still think it has anything to do with the berries?" Again, Simon shrugged, then he looked over his shoulder at the dining room table. Alex thought he was probably checking the fruit bowl to see if any more of the odd fruit was present. He guessed from the lack of their characteristic smell, and from the fact that Simon quickly turned back to face the family room, that there were none. "I don't know," Simon said. "I just don't know." Simon seemed to have calmed down, but Alex could tell that he did not like being unable to understand what was happening. Not that Alex felt much better about it himself. He turned around quickly, stepped to the front curtains, and heard Simon draw in a hissing gasp as he peeked through a small gap between them. He looked out into the front yard and, as best he could, glanced along the sidewalk and street. He focused mainly in the direction from which pursuit would have come, but he also checked the other way in case the bizarre group had gone past his house. He saw one of his neighbors across the street, an older, very nice retired man whom he knew only as Mr. Thomas, watering his yard, and he saw a few squirrels and a robin, but no other sign of life or movement. Stepping back from the window, Alex told Simon and Megan, "I don't see them. I don't know if they tried to follow us or not, but I don't think they could have seen which house we went into." Simon and Megan let out twin sighs of relief, then looked at each other and laughed, apparently both having been unconsciously holding their breath while Alex looked outside. Alex felt a ridiculous twinge of jealousy over their shared nervous amusement, but he quickly pushed it down. It was far weaker, in any case, than his boiling stew of other emotions, which included fear, astonishment, curiosity, and even a bit of excitement. Alex was about to ask Simon for more of his thoughts on the berries, but was prevented by Megan suddenly asking, "How am I going to get home? I don't want to walk out there with those things around." This distracted Alex. He had to admit the idea of going outside any time soon wasn't appealing to him either. Megan had already pointed out that her mother tended to panic if she arrived late, and though the three had made remarkably good time thus far, that wouldn't help Megan much if she had to stay in Alex's house until they could be sure that any potential threat, reptilian or otherwise, was gone. Who knew how long they would need to wait to be safe? They had no idea if the group they had seen were even interested in following them, but if they were, then they might be willing to wait for hours. He was about to bite the bullet and just offer to escort Megan home if she wanted, though he wasn't sure how reassuring that might be to her, but this time Simon preempted him by asking, "It's Thursday, right?" Puzzled, Alex nodded, and at the same time Megan said, "Yeah?" "Okay then," Simon said. "On Thursdays my mom only works half days. I'll call her and ask her to come pick us up, and she can take you home." Megan looked intensely relieved, but Alex asked, "What are you going to tell her? Why would you guys need a ride home from my house? Apart from dinosaur dogs, I mean," he added, liking the term that Megan had coined for the creatures they had seen. Now Megan looked troubled, and Alex was unhappy to have made her feel that way. Simon, however, said, "I'll just say we saw a big fight going on and were scared to walk home the rest of the way." After a moment's pause, Alex asked, "Isn't that kind of a lame reason to need a ride home?" Simon shrugged. "Sure," he said. "That's okay, though. That way she won't worry too much about it and ask a lot of questions." He was still pale, Alex noted, and his mother would no doubt be easily convinced that he was afraid to walk home, even if it was only the remaining block or so from Alex's house. "Okay," he admitted. "I guess that makes sense. All right if I use the phone?" "Sure," Alex said. While Simon took the portable unit from the side table in the family room and walked into the kitchen to call his mother, Alex crept once more to the curtains. Pulling them slightly farther apart with one finger, he again looked out into the front yard. Mr. Thomas was no longer visible across the street, but there was still no sign of the tunic-wearing men or the dinosaur dogs. Then, movement to the right caught Alex's attention. He felt a brief surge of fear, but when he looked more closely he saw that it was just the same woman with the stroller whom they had seen earlier. She had clearly made it the rest of the way around the block from the other side, and was now on her last leg and heading toward home. Megan's voice startled Alex, coming from almost directly over his shoulder, asking, "Are they out there yet?" Alex did his best to hide his reaction to her closeness, which made his face feel quite warm, and said, "No, they're not out there. Take a look." He stepped to the side, holding the small gap open for her. Megan bent over and peeked out for a few seconds before standing up and shaking her head. Nope, she admitted, I don't see them. Alex let the curtains fall closed again, and he and Megan stood looking at each other. Alex had no idea what to say. He would ordinarily have been delighted to have Megan standing with him in his family room, but under the circumstances he sincerely doubted that he was giving her very good associations. He wanted to say something clever and reassuring, something that would make him seem competent and confident. Unfortunately, he was at a loss, so all he did was shuffle his feet. Megan didn't look much more composed than he felt, but Alex strongly suspected that her reasons were not the same as his. The two were rescued from their awkward moment by Simon, who came back into the family room and said, Well, my mom was sleeping when I called, so it's going to be about 20 minutes before she gets here, but she's coming. He put the phone back in its cradle. Megan's tension diminished visibly, and she said, Thank you, Simon. No problem, Simon said in a distracted tone of voice. The three stood in silence for a bit before Alex asked, So, Simon, do you think the berries could really have anything to do with this? Simon looked puzzled, but Alex didn't think it was because he didn't understand the question. Rather, he seemed to be trying to work things through in his head. He still looked pale, but otherwise normal. I'm not sure, he said. I mean, this time, we all three saw the same thing at the same time, and heard it. So it could be some kind of shared hallucination, I guess. I mean, no one else could see them. Megan asked, Are you talking about telepathy stuff, like you said before? Simon nodded. Yeah. I was kind of doubting it, though, because even though I think the dreams were all at the same time, the things Alex and I heard, and you and Alex saw, were all at different times and weren't exactly the same. But this just now was. And that lady and her baby couldn't see them, so I don't know. Maybe we are just all seeing things. Seeing the same things. Megan looked troubled and unsure, and Alex had serious doubts. I don't know, he said. They sure looked and sounded real. Simon gaped at him, incredulous, so Alex quickly clarified, I don't mean they looked and sounded normal, just real. Solid, I mean, really there. Yeah, Megan agreed, they did. Simon shrugged. Yeah, he admitted, but maybe hallucinations do look solid. I don't know, I've never had one before. The dreams seemed real too, but I know they were dreams. Alex had to admit that Simon had a point. On both nights, the dreams had felt unusually palpable and immediate, even given the fantastic nature of the first one. He had been able to smell the plants in the garden last night, a fact which Simon had rightly pointed out was something he didn't recall ever happening before. He knew they were dreams, but they were quite extraordinary ones. Who could say what else his senses might be able to convey without a shred of external reality? Simon once again turned to look at the fruit bowl on the dining room table, and Alex followed his gaze, stepping forward a little to get a clearer view. He saw the usual assortment of fruits, apples, tangerines, a few bananas still remaining from the bunch that had been there the other day. He wondered whether the missing ones had been eaten or thrown away, since even the remaining handful were developing quite a few black patches. There were no more of the berries that had so delighted them 2 days ago. Megan looked at the bowl, though Alex knew she had never seen it before. Looking back up at him, she asked, So your mom hasn't gotten any more? Alex shook his head. It doesn't look like it, he replied. I'll have to ask her where they came from. They all stood silently contemplating the wooden bowl in the center of the table, as if hoping it would somehow provide them with answers. Then Alex glanced up at the dining room window, the curtains of which were open, and his memory was jogged. Oh, hey, he said brightly, causing both Simon and Megan to give startled little twitches. Since you're here, I want to show you guys something. If it's still there, anyway. He walked past the other two and into the dining room, skirting the table on the left as he approached the curtain. What? Simon asked as he and Megan followed. Last night when I woke up from that dream, I didn't hear that same noise again or anything else from outside, but I did think I heard my mom moving around and talking downstairs. So I got up and came down to see what she was doing, since I was awake anyway. When I got near the bottom of the stairs, I could tell she didn't have any of the lights on. My mom doesn't see real well in the dark, so I kind of wondered what she was doing, you know? Simon and Megan both nodded. Well, I kind of called out to her before I got there, and I heard a quick bunch of noise, But then everything went quiet. When I came into the family room and looked in the dining room, that's where the noise sounded like it was coming from, she wasn't here. Simon looked puzzled. Where was she? He asked. Well, Alex replied, I don't think it was really my mom in the first place. Simon's eyes widened in vicarious alarm, but Megan just looked more intensely interested. Anyway, Alex went on, there was no one here, but this curtain was moving like there was a breeze or something. He gestured at the left hand draped by the dining room window. He had not yet worked up the nerve to touch it again. Simon's face now took on a strange look of mixed wonder and concern, and his brow furrowed in sudden concentration. What? Alex asked him, causing Megan to look at Simon to see what he might have done that was distracting. Nothing, Simon told him tersely, shaking his head. Go on. Well, anyway, Alex said in response to Simon's urging, I came up to check out the curtain, and when I did, I found something, well, really weird. He just looked at the curtain now, still hesitant to touch it. What if he pulled it aside and the wall behind it was completely normal? Would Megan and Simon think he was crazy? Would he himself think it? Would that actually be worse or better than finding the same thing he had found last night? What? Megan asked anxiously. What did you find? Alex took a deep breath, then reached out and yanked the curtain to the side, deliberately doing so in a way that he thought would cause a disturbance. Behind the curtain, now much easier to see in the bright daylight that streamed in through the window, the wall rippled and waved like the surface of a pond, the disturbance spreading out to the limits of an ovoid shape that, just like last night, overlapped the frame of the window and even reached out into the glass a bit. At their highest extent, the waves reached a little above Alex's head, though they wouldn't have been above Simon's. Below, they didn't quite reach the baseboard, and on the side away from the window, they didn't go beyond what the curtain would have covered. What the frack? Simon breathed, and Alex felt strangely delighted by his astonished look, as well as Megan's. He discovered that he much preferred having the strange phenomenon still present to what he would surely have felt had the wall been normal. If this was a hallucination, at least he wasn't alone in having it. The ripples died out in only a few seconds, but Simon and Megan continued to gape at the wall. Megan softly asked, What is it? What's doing that? I don't know, Alex replied, feeling weirdly proud of the fact that the other two were so enthralled. But if you think that's weird, watch this. Without further ado, he brought his right hand forward and stuck it into the wall. He was prepared to draw back instantly, just in case he encountered resistance or any unpleasant sensation, but as had happened last night, he felt nothing at all. His hand passed through the surface without meeting anything more substantial than air, just as his fingers had before. It went all the way up to his wrist without causing a disturbance. Then the end of his jacket sleeve encountered the boundary. It, too, passed through easily, but he thought he felt a very tenuous pushback, edging the fabric up his arm ever so slightly. Also, once his jacket touched the wall, it sent a cascade of ripples, much larger than those he had seen before, bouncing back and forth across the surface of the wall and window, overlapping and interfering with each other. Alex watched the waves for an instant with amazed curiosity, immersed in the wall to the distal end of his forearm. Then Simon grabbed him and yanked him back. His hand was completely fine, and as the jacket came away from the wall, more ripples were initiated, but the removal of his flesh from the surface didn't seem to trouble it in the slightest. What the heck are you doing? Simon practically screeched. Are you crazy? What if your hand got stuck in there? Alex gawped at Simon, amazed. That possibility had never occurred to him. Yet even now that Simon mentioned it, Alex didn't really think it was something he needed to worry about. The wall had been this way last night, and it was this way now. Why would it suddenly stop right when his hand was in it? Unless, of course, it was some sort of trap, specifically designed to chop the hands off curious middle school students. But that didn't seem likely. Megan, meanwhile, asked, "What is it?" more fervently than before, not commenting on Simon's concern over the danger to Alex's hand. "Beats the heck out of me," Alex admitted. "Simon?" Simon just shook his head. Megan seemed both puzzled and intensely curious, but unlike Simon, she didn't seem afraid. With a determined look, she turned to the dining room table. Stretching out her hand, she grabbed an apple, and holding it up, she first looked at it contemplatively, then asked Alex, Is it okay if I try something with this? Alex, mystified, shrugged and said, Sure. Megan stepped up to the wall. After carefully choosing her angle, she gently tossed the apple at the space behind the curtain, which Alex still held to the side. The apple, like Alex's sleeve, caused a great many ripples to carry him back and forth along the oval region of the wall. Alex was almost surprised that it didn't cause a splash, but it disappeared into the surface without otherwise leaving a trace. Though he wasn't terribly surprised, given what had happened to his hand, Alex stared at the wall in amazement. Megan ducked to the side after her throw and looked out the dining room window into the backyard. After a moment's inspection, she declared, I don't see the apple anywhere in your yard, Alex. Alex hadn't considered the possibility that the apple might simply have passed through the wall and out the other side. He hadn't honestly thought about what might have happened to it at all. He leaned to the side and looked out himself. His house's lot was not large, and the backyard was simple and all but unadorned except for the small garden Alex's mother maintained. The grass hadn't been mowed in over a week, but early in the year it grew slowly, so it was easily short enough to have revealed the vivid red of the apple Megan had thrown. There was no sign of the fruit anywhere close to the house, and Alex knew Megan hadn't launched it with enough force to bring it anywhere near the property lines, even if it had taken a funny bounce or had rolled. Nope, he said, it's definitely not there. Megan looked almost more excited than stupefied as she asked, Where do you think it went? I don't know, Alex answered truthfully, only having considered the idea for the first time that moment. I don't think it's just inside the wall or anything. I feel like we would have heard a thump or something. What do you think, Simon? When Alex looked at Simon, he became alarmed again, as when he and Megan had first revealed their shared dream. Simon's face was even paler than before, and his eyes were wide and staring. Megan noticed the same thing because she said, Simon, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? Simon, seemingly startled by the question, shook his head quickly and said, No, I'm okay. It's just, this is crazy. Yeah, Alex said, but we kind of already said that, didn't we? No, yeah, but this is different. I mean, it's like some kind of space warp or something. Suddenly, an alarming thought apparently occurred to him, for he asked Alex urgently, You didn't, try to stick your head through it last night or anything, did you? Alex laughed and said, No, I just put my fingertips in when I tried to touch the wall to see why it was doing what it was doing. Simon visibly relaxed a bit, and he said, Good. Don't put your head through it, please. Alex frowned. Why not? He asked. Both of Simon's eyebrows rose so high that Alex half expected them to disappear into his hair. Are you kidding? He asked. No, Alex responded, glancing over at Megan to see if she understood the cause of Simon's concern. Her expression, however, revealed nothing to him. She was simply watching the two boys raptly. Simon, exasperated and still far from calm, said to Alex, Because you don't even know where it goes. What if it's, I don't know, somewhere in outer space or on another planet or something? You could stick your head through and have it, explode or something. Simon spread his hands wide, indicating just how far Alex's head might spread if such a thing happened. Alex thought that sounded ridiculous. Why would my head explode? He asked. A perverse part of him now wanted very much to put his head through the walls, specifically in response to Simon's admonition that he not. Simon, clearly piqued by Alex's obtuseness, replied, Because if it does go out into space, there's no air. You'd pop like a balloon. Megan spoke again now, shaking her head briefly, saying, But wait, if it did go into outer space or something, wouldn't all the air from here be being sucked through it, like when a window pops open in an airplane or something? Yeah, Alex said. And anyway, my hand didn't feel like it was going to pop. I don't know, Simon wailed desperately. Maybe air can't go through only solid things, and maybe it doesn't go into space, but it could still go someplace almost as bad. Suddenly his face brightened, and he seemed to distract himself from his worry. Maybe it goes to the place wherever those lizard things and stuff come from. He continued to gain energy as he went on, exclaiming, Maybe that's how they got here. Megan looked as astonished and dubious as Alex felt. I don't know, she murmured, her voice politely but clearly expressing her skepticism. Yeah, that seems a little hard to swallow, Alex said. For one thing, I think me and my mom and dad would have noticed if there were dinosaur dogs coming out through our dining room. Would you? Simon asked. No one but us three even seems to be able to see those things. And you did say you heard something down here last night. Alex was momentarily taken aback. Could he have heard the sound of one of those dinosaur dogs poking around his house? He had heard bumps and shuffling and a voice that he thought might be his mother's, and those lizard things could talk, after all. The two that they had heard out in the street just a few minutes ago didn't sound anything like his mom, but they hadn't heard the third one's voice, had they? And what if there were more than just those three? What if there were lots of them, and they had been coming and going through this space warp or whatever it was, trusting that no one could see them? But if that were the case, how could they have been getting outside? Even if they knew how to open the door, they couldn't have locked it behind themselves. It was a bit too much to think that dinosaur dogs, or even the men with them, could have gotten a spare set of keys to Alex's house. Another thought occurred to Alex that further convinced him against Simon's idea. I don't think they could be coming from here, he said. Forget even thinking about how they'd get out of the house and lock the door behind them. That flying manta ray thing was up in the sky, and it was way too big to have fit through that. He pointed to the wall behind the curtain, which he still held pulled to the side. Now, as he thought of the creature from the other night, he let the curtain drop back into place. After all, how sure was he really that the flying manta couldn't squeeze through that oval if it folded its wings? Not that the curtain would be able to prevent the creature from coming to the dining room if it were bent on doing so, perhaps still searching for whatever it had sought 2 nights before. Nevertheless, Alex felt better to let the curtain return to its normal position. At least he no longer felt like he was inviting such a visit. His point, however, seemed to have given Simon pause, and his face lost some of its brightness, his brow now furrowing in thought. I don't know, he said. Maybe they didn't come from here. Maybe there's more than one of these things. He gestured to the curtain as he spoke. Or maybe we're all completely crazy and none of it's real. But if it is real, well, it goes someplace and we don't know where. And I know you, Alex. Tell me you didn't think about sticking your head in there. Well, I didn't until you mentioned it, Alex said, letting his voice trail off, feeling embarrassed and amused at the same time. Simon grimaced and said, Yeah, I thought so. And you would have thought it on your own eventually. Alex shrugged and admitted, Yeah, I probably would have. Simon rolled his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak again, but was interrupted by the sound of a car horn honking in front of Alex's house. All three of them jumped, startled by the double beep, and they automatically looked toward the front windows, though the curtains were closed and they couldn't see anything outside. That's my mom, Simon said, stating the obvious. She got here way faster than 20 minutes, didn't she? Alex, who hadn't looked at a clock, said, I guess so. They stood where they were, making no move toward the front door, just looking back and forth at each other. Alex wasn't sure what the other two might be thinking, but he guessed that they wished they could stay and talk more about what was going on, from dreams and dinosaur dogs to flying manta rays and rippling walls. He also suspected that neither Simon nor Megan was terribly thrilled to go outside, even with Mrs. Belmont and her car waiting for them. A third, shorter beep sounded, and in response to it the three started to move. Megan followed Simon as he headed toward the front hall, picking up her bag, which she had dropped on the floor near Alex's. Before opening the door, Simon turned to Alex, who had followed him and Megan, and said, Alex, please promise me you won't go poking around in there. Huh? Alex responded, deliberately feigning confusion. The wall, Simon reminded him pointedly. Don't go poking around in that thing in the wall. Why not? Alex asked. I mean, fine, I won't stick my head through it, but... Simon interrupted him. Don't stick anything through it. What if something in there grabbed you or sucked you in and you were never able to come out again? What if things like that are what really happens to all those missing kids you see pictures of on milk cartons? Trust Simon to come up with such an idea. The thought that there were strange, wavy portals popping up throughout the world, luring children through, never to be seen again, was enough to send a chill down Alex's spine. Megan, too, seemed to find the idea disquieting, for her eyes widened and her lips parted slightly as if she were surprised. She said, He's right, Alex. You need to be careful. Alex sighed as if deeply disappointed, and pretended to be persuaded to caution only by their concern, when in fact, after what Simon had just said, he felt no immediate desire to go anywhere near the curtain. All right, he said, trying to sound reluctant. I'll leave it alone. But we've got to talk more about this, seriously. Megan, could you come by our homeroom in the morning? Which one is it? She asked. 208, he replied. Megan nodded. Sure, she said. I'm in 106. It's just downstairs. What time do you guys get there? I usually get there about 15 or 20 minutes before class, but Simon doesn't usually get there till almost time for the bell. I'll be early tomorrow, Simon promised. Heck, I'll get there earlier than that. I may even get a ride to school. He stopped, looking frightened, and Alex knew why. Megan had first spotted a dinosaur dog that morning, and it was entirely possible that the creatures might be out and about early the following day as well. Megan shuddered slightly, but she said, I'll be there. I'll try to be there about 20 minutes early. Now a longer honk of the horn caused the three to jump again. Okay, well, Simon said hastily. Talk to you tomorrow, then. He opened the front door and stepped out. His mother's car was pulled up to the curb directly in front of the walkway that led to Alex's front door. Megan, following Simon out the door, also said, See you tomorrow, Alex. Alex thought he saw her glance up and down the street as she walked toward the waiting car, and he did likewise, first quickly looking to his right, then giving a longer look to his left. The street looked completely normal. There was no sign anywhere of the bizarre procession from which he, Megan, and Simon had fled. Still, after a quick wave to Simon's mother, he closed the front door even before Simon and Megan had a chance to get into the car. He did not, at least for now, want to run the slightest risk of being exposed to the street without the protective presence of Mrs. Belmont and her car.